I was recently reading these two books and something sort of dawned on me. When it comes to the Hiddenness argument by J.L. Schellenberg, a key premise in his argument is that if a loving God exists, then God would always be open to a personal relationship with any persons. Now, personal relationship in the consequent there of that conditional, J.L. Schellenberg limits. So you're only in a personal relationship with God if you're aware that you're in the relationship with God. Now, this makes sense on the human level. It's sort of weird to say, I'm in a relationship with John, who lives in a different place in the country, even though I have no clue that he exists, right? To be in the minimal, to be in a personal relationship with him is that I believe the guy exists, right? Goes beyond that, but that's at least the minimum. Now, you might say, likewise, to be in a relationship with God, the minimum is that I got to believe God exists, right? Otherwise, how can I be in a relationship with God? Well, the same thing doesn't hold. The analogy doesn't line up perfectly between human to human relationships and God to human relationships. Part of that is because of God's nature, what God can do as an omni-God, all of his powers and knowledge and so on, and the fact that he's morally perfect and has to balance and weigh different goods in achieving his plans and balancing that. So when I read Gellman, I was really pleasantly surprised to find out that he categorizes 4 grades of religious experience or experiences of God. The first level of religious experience is the Schellenberg level. That is, it's the level that Schellenberg takes to constitute the only meaningful personal relationship with God, which is the person is in a conscious relationship of God. They're maybe having a conscious experience of God, and they mentally take it that they are having that experience. So for fancy philosophical term, de dicto, that is, if you were to ask them, did you have an experience of God? Do you believe that God exists? And they would assent to that proposition because they were aware, they were conscious that they were having an experience of God. Now, at the second level is someone does have an experience of God, but they don't recognize God as God at that time. That is, they may have like an overwhelming aesthetic experience, seeing a snowy mountain, scene where perhaps when the moon's out and it's glittering on the snow, it's so beautiful. And perhaps in that moment, they have this overwhelming experience of awe, wonder, and something that they just can't put a finger on. And it may turn out later that they recognize that they actually had an experience of God, even though they thought they were just having a merely naturalistic experience of, say, awe and wonder and cool things going on in their brain. So now you might say, well, why would God allow for a meaningful relationship with a person of grade 2? Well, as philosopher Trent Doherty has pointed out in comments on the post that I originally did talking about this, he mentioned that he had experiences of awe and wonder that later translated and he realized were actually religious experiences. And the fact that he had those experiences and God hadn't yet revealed himself, so to speak, to the person, that was actually part of maybe what opened. Now here I'm adding a little bit, but that's probably part of what opened Trent up to a transcendent being or reality. And that he said that those experiences were actually instrumental in leading him to belief in God. So God may allow a person to be in a state of non-belief that God exists for a time, even when they want a relationship with God, or at least would be open to one, so that they form the relationship with God in a way that is going to sustain them for the long haul. It won't be a flash in the pan where they have this crazy experience of God and then later they forget about it. Instead, God may, this is just one way, may allow for non-resistant non-belief for the greater good of a solid and lasting personal relationship with someone at a future time. Now, grade 3 and grade 4 we won't focus on, but they are also really interesting, and they're cases where a person has an experience of God, but they don't even register the experience but yet the experience is transformative and impacts how they live. This can happen when all of a sudden, people have a transformative experience. All of a sudden, they stop doing bad stuff that they were doing, and they're just all of a sudden sort of oriented toward things that are good and healthy that they weren't before, and they don't even know they had that experience or can't quite put a finger on it. God may work in that way for various reasons. And to tie this all back together and how this casts doubt on the hiddenness argument is that the hiddenness argument says that if a loving God exists, God will always be open to a personal relationship with people, such that you won't find people that are open to a relationship with God but don't believe in God. That is, you won't find people who are non-resistant to belief in God and having a relationship with God, and yet don't believe in God. And so if you find those people, and I think there are those people. Some people claim in response to the hiddenness argument there are no such people. I don't think that's the best route to go in response to this argument. However, just granting that there are such people, it may be that those people are having different grades of experience or relationship with God. So God may allow them for a time to be non-resistantly in a state of non-belief in order to achieve a greater good in their life. So the hiddenness argument proposes or trades on an overly restrictive limitation on what is possible with regard to being in a personal relationship with God. Once we peel back the layers and see that there are other grades of experience that can establish a relationship with God, even though the person wouldn't say that they believe that God exists, they would be a non-believer in God's existence, it's still possible that God does exist and is perfectly loving, and yet we find that there are non-resistant non-believers. If you want to find out more about the hiddenness argument, I have a whole series of shorts that you can check out here.